Thanks, Jeremy. I appreciate being here. Before we get into questions, I just wanted to say I appreciated you all co-hosting and doing this as well. I think it's a service to the candidates and certainly is more importantly a service to the voters. So thanks for taking time with all of us.
Well, first question, what do you consider the biggest problem that needs solving and leadership from the governor in Wyoming?
I think that one of the biggest problems we're going to be facing and have faced is the challenges we face from the federal government. We think in Wyoming that we have a good track record, not just with me, but historically a good track record of the state addressing issues in a proactive fashion. I'll go back to the previous administration when it came to hydraulic fracturing. We were the first state to have rules on the books regarding that. We've certainly tried to continue that trend with baseline water testing, with what we're doing with forest health, with the water strategy. But as we see, with 27 federal lawsuits, 13 involving the EPA, there's a continual challenge, and that we don't anticipate going away. And so, if the question is, what's the biggest challenge in leadership for the governor of Wyoming? I think it is how do you push back against that, and at the same time recognizing that just as a strategy, you also have to have your own vision and move forward in a positive fashion. And so that's why I think it's important to address some of those things with lawsuits, but I also think it's important to set an example and saying, we're not just complaining about what you're proposing, we have a better idea, and whether it's forest health, the water strategy, the energy strategy, what we're trying to do with roads, all of those things I think set an example and are proactive. And as I know I've told this group before, it's been said, and I think it's true, with states' rights come state responsibility. And I think that's absolutely true, and I think that's what the governors of this state historically have done and the legislature. So that's what we will do as well.
So talking about the lawsuits, you do have quite a stack of lawsuits running simultaneously. Are those valuable? Do you think they're actually going to do any good, or is it just a matter of making a statement?
No, I think that they're going to do some good. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean that I'm guaranteeing a win on all of those. I don't think you can do it just for a statement. I think, for example, let's just take coal. Whether it's regarding existing coal-fired plants, new coal-fired plants, regional haze, these are things that it's important for us to be proactive in, not just for symbolism, but I think also to point out the error of what we see from the federal government. Regional haze is a wonderful example in my mind, because the federal government says states need to come up with a regional haze plan. And even before I took office, the DEQ had been working on this and had worked on it for a number of years and said, here's the plan, our state implementation plan. And that was largely dismissed by the EPA, saying, no, it's not good enough. But if you look at the difference between the state plan and the federal plan, we get to the same place with regard to regional haze. It takes the state plan a few extra years, but it does it at much less cost. And regional haze, this is something that is, somebody at some point said, we want the air to look like this. And when you get to choose that point in time, number one, that's a big decision. They get to say, we want the air to look like this at this point in time, and this is how you're going to go about it. And in the West, where wildfires are the number one cause of regional haze, not coal-fired plants, it's a big deal. And the way that the EPA went about it, as I said, it's going to cost many more millions of dollars for the EPA to do it. And the power plants and the coal miners, they don't just absorb those costs, they're passed on. And for people on fixed incomes, whether it's our senior citizens or young people just getting started, that is a big deal. And so those lawsuits, my answer is yes, I think those lawsuits do make a difference. I think that, as it is, we'll hopefully win some. I don't think we're going to win them all just because of the nature of lawsuits. But I think that is important for us as a state to be engaged in that as the leading energy exporter, as the leading coal producer in the country. If we're not proactive on it, how can we ask other states and citizens from other states to be proactive in this discussion as well? And that is part of the goal as well. We think everybody should be involved in the energy discussion because it's so critical to our country's future and our country's ability to remain competitive.
That's one obviously not a new question for you, we imagine, but what do you wish you had done differently in the Cindy Hill and Senate File 104 matter?
Well, you know, in hindsight, I wish we wouldn't have done what we did. I mean, the court told us that we were wrong. But understand this, you know, since about 1980, I think there's been about 20 plus lawsuits filed in the Supreme Court where actions taken by the legislature and the governor have been found unconstitutional. And that is the process we have. That is the balance of power between the three separate areas of government. And the legislature was concerned about lack of accountability. They were concerned about the way the department was going to be run. They reflected back on this question of whether you should have an elected representative or a appointed representative of the Department of Education, which had been years in the making. And so long before Senate File 104 was passed, some of these things were in the minds of the legislature and in my mind as well. And when it was passed, you know, it was passed by about 2/3 of the legislature, minus one. A lot of those folks were lawyers. The Legislative Service Office had lawyers look at it. We had ultimately two attorney generals look at it, and all thought that it was constitutional. The Supreme Court, 3 out of the 2 said it was not constitutional. 2 thought it was constitutional. And so it wasn't an intent to do something unconstitutional. It was an intent to say we spend about $4 million every single day of the year on education. And if there's anything important that government gets right, certainly it is education. And when we pay that amount, we want to make sure at the state level, as we're demanding accountability throughout K through 12, that at the state level, we're doing a good job. And it was felt we were not doing a good job. So, you know, that went forward. The Supreme Court said we're wrong. You know, I know where the responsibility lies. I signed the bill. The buck stops with me. And so in hindsight, nobody would have wanted to go that way. And that's just a fact. But it wasn't done trying to do something unconstitutional. It was done to help education, to help our teachers, our parents, and our kids.
Your recent statements on Medicaid expansion bring to mind your comments on climate change, in which you disagree with the basic issue and you say you do, or at least are uncertain about it, but you still propose action. How can voters take your decisions seriously if you don't believe in why you're doing them?
Well, I do believe in why I'm doing them. I don't think you have to believe in climate change to say that it's a goal for everybody and every energy source to try to have energy as clean as possible and as efficient as possible. And so whether it's oil, gas, or even renewables, I think there's always going to be room for improvement. And the problem that we have is you have people who say, here's climate change, and I believe in it, I believe it's man-made, and you have people who say there's no way. And everybody is sort of camped on either side and just throwing names and rocks at each other, and nothing's getting done. And that argument stalls out. And so what I do believe is you don't have to believe in climate change to say, whether it's wind, oil, gas, coal, there's always room for improvement. And let's focus, rather than on this, you know, name calling, let's focus on a solution. And that's why, you know, the Integrated Test Center that we proposed, which is about $15 million from the legislature last session, we're looking at that solution. And as I've described to you before, that's going to take the slipstream off a coal-fired plant. And rather than having it viewed as a liability, see if it could be turned into an asset, a feedstock for petrochemicals, a feedstock for you know, large food manufacturers looking at mixing with algae to turn it into an artificial sweetener. We've visited with a company who's interested in it in terms of making graphene. And so I think that's the exact problem, is people are saying you have to believe one way or another to act. And what I'm saying is I'm skeptical that it's man-made. But whether I am wrong or I'm right, shouldn't we all have a goal in saying, listen, we need to move forward and we need to improve? Because what I'm not skeptical of is what's happening with coal. Coal has a target on its back. I'm not skeptical that you know, it's a great resource that we have 100+ years of use. And so we want to make sure that we have the ability to use that and not leave it in the ground, not just for the benefit of Wyoming, but frankly for the benefit of the country.
But you said almost, I mean, not the exact same thing, but sort of the same approach now with Medicaid expansion, saying, I'm still opposed to this sort of in concept, but we should look at moving forward on a number of fronts.
Yeah, well, I'm a practical guy. I mean, as I said, when we sued, that was one of the first things we did, we sued on Obamacare, the ACA. But I also said in a later state of the state, you know, we can't stick our head in the sand and pretend that, the U.S. Supreme Court hasn't ruled. We can't stick our head in the sand and say that this isn't the law of the land. And so now I think it's incumbent upon us to say, this is the law. What solutions can we find? And that's why over the past months, the Department of Health has been working on what would be, under these circumstances, what is the best scenario for Wyoming. And a couple of weeks ago, we had a meeting with HHS and CMS saying, here's what we think a Wyoming package may look like. And we didn't reach any decisions with them. We heard some no's and you've got it wrong, but we're going to continue that process. As we came out of the session last year, I looked at what the legislature did, and I thought that where they left it is it was our job, the executive branch, to try to put together the best package possible for presentation to the legislature this year. And so, again, I don't have to like it, but I have to be a realist. I think that is part of the role of governor is you may not like something. You may not like the fact that we've got floods in the spring, but you can't say because I don't like it, I'm not going to deal with it. And I feel the same about Medicaid and the ACA. On top of that, my first and second year in office, I was supportive of Healthy Frontiers. Because outside the question of the ACA, we have to have a recognition that there is people who are working who can't afford health care in this state. We have to recognize that collectively our hospitals report about $200 million a year in uncompensated care. We have to recognize that as we are failing to act on the ACA, that there's a website, I can't remember what it is, but they've got a running total of federal dollars that are going to California, Colorado, wherever other states. Their total shows about, $63, $65 million. And so those are things on the other side I think we have to just be aware of. And so in these decisions, the fact is you're not going to act on everything that you say this is something I like. But you have to act on everything that is happening and that is, a fact. And I think that is one of the hallmarks of good governors is you don't get to make you don't necessarily get to make decisions on just issues you like. You have to make decisions on the tough issues and things you don't like because you've got to represent all the citizens. And it's not going to be a good excuse to say, I didn't want to deal with that because I don't like it.
What's next for the state's economy, and what will you do to help Wyoming get there if reelected?
Well, there's obviously a lot of variables in the state's economy, and we are not an island, and because we export a lot, including energy, what's happening nationally and internationally can certainly affect that, and I think everyone needs to be aware of that. The economy generally can affect the economy in Wyoming. And so what I think we need to do is recognize that there's always going to be market fluctuations, and how do we prepare ourselves so that we have the best trend line possible so that when there's highs and lows, we continue to move forward. And in that vein, I think that the diversification of our economy is paramount. And that's not an original Matt thought. I think legislators and governors for many years have thought that, and rightfully so. But the change that I see in just the last 3.5 years is that we've moved beyond just talking about it and actually finding solutions, and I think that's in the technology sector. When you recognize that Wyoming, year in and year out, produces about the lowest cost electricity, when you recognize that we are geographically safe in terms of tornadoes and hurricanes and volcanoes, other than the big one in Yellowstone, but as you compare us to other states, we are geographically a very safe state. It just seems like to me that technology is a natural area of expansion and diversification. And it's not only natural in terms of we want to diversify our economy, it's natural in terms of meeting some of the needs in a rural state, telemedicine, telecommuting, teleeducation. So there's so many benefits to it. And what we've done over the last 3.5 years, is we've expanded the capacity of broadband to our schools exponentially. My CIS says it's about 1,200% increase. And on top of that, when I took over, I think there was only 2 towns in Wyoming that had Ethernet speed, and now I think we're 15, 16 towns that have Ethernet speed. And then on top of that, with the legislation we got through last session, which will put a 100 gigabit backbone throughout the state, the potential is amazing. And you see that just this week, Greenhouse Data in Cheyenne did the opening for their new expansion. And this is a company that started small in Wyoming, and they've expanded exponentially. And they have data there that if anybody has a smartphone, some of the data you get from your smartphone, regardless of model, regardless of where you are, comes from their data center. And I just think that's remarkable when we're the smallest state in population, but we have that sort of capacity. And when you see Microsoft, investing up to $500 million in our state, I think this is not just a talk of diversity, I think it is actual diversification. On top of that, with regard to the economy, I think we always have to stay true and tough with regard to our three largest industries, energy, ag, and tourism. Energy we've talked about a little bit, and that's why we started with energy strategy. We recognize how important that is to our future and how important it is that we be very proactive and that we fight against that which we think is going to hurt the energy interest. With regard to agriculture, it's our third largest in terms of dollars, but it should get best supporting actor in a lot of ways because agriculture not only helps in terms of feeding us, but it provides these vistas in the open space, wildlife opportunities, recreation opportunities that help not only tourism, but in fact help minerals as well. If you did a what if, that is, what if we didn't have all these ag lands and they were completely covered in houses and buildings, we would have lost a lot of opportunities for mineral development. And with regard to tourism, of course, it is wonderful to go into the parks, Yellowstone National Park, Grand Teton National Park. I'm very proud that we have those parks. But it's also wonderful for the tourist to drive through the Little Snake River Valley and see bags and savory and see cows out there and see working ranches and see people on horseback. And it's wonderful to drive, through Torrington and see the hay being put up. That adds so much to tourism. And so our obligation is to make sure those remain our top three and at the same time look for other opportunities. We have that not only in technology, but our manufacturing has increased beyond the national rate last year. In 2013, we were seventh best in increasing our international exports. And so we've got a lot going on, and it's not by accident, it's by design. And we know there will be hard days coming, but the more we can prepare and think about it and prepare for the ups and downs, the better off our state will be.
So you talked about federal regulations increasing coal target lines back. If you're talking about the biggest threat to Wyoming, is that it, or what would you consider the biggest threat to the state?
Well, I think that is not just coal. I think the biggest threat overall is the federal government action. And we've talked about coal. I'll give you another example that could be devastating to our state. Next year in September 2015, the Fish and Wildlife Service is going to make a determination whether the sage grouse is going to be listed. As you know, they don't look at where the sage grouse are when they make that determination. They look at where it historically has been. And that's about 80% of our state. And if you close down 80% of our state, that's a death spiral for our state. And so that's an example of why I think the federal government overall is probably the biggest concern for our state. On top of that, one of the things they're looking at now is waters of the U.S. And waters of the U.S., we've been vocal and been opposing that because when they are going to define waters of the U.S., they don't look at what we would consider natural tributaries, the big rivers. They look at where there could be water. And when you give somebody that much discretion, it becomes arbitrary. And when you can have an arbitrary decisions of this is a place where waters of the U.S. could be, not necessarily is, but could be, they're not only controlling a lot of water, they're controlling a lot of ground. And so that's why I think not just Wyoming, but the West has to be so active in opposing that.
Is Wyoming going to have a refugee resettlement office? And if so, can you deny that you've had something to do with that?
No, I won't deny it. We wrote a letter to the federal government saying that we wanted to pursue this, and we have been looking at it. And one of the challenges we have as we looked at it, it's, I don't know, over 200 code of federal regulations that we've been wading through, and that's a lot. But in saying that, you know, I think that it's unfortunate as we looked at this that the sort of the public perception of it, you know, we hear about refugee camps. There's no refugee camp in the United States. The refugee resettlement was started post-World War II when we were looking at displaced Europeans who had no government to provide service and protection. And it's continued on since World War II. And every state in the country has some sort of service except Wyoming. And so that seems a bit odd to me. And it seems odd to me that this is another example. People have different points of view on whether they want refugees here in the state or not. But the fact of the matter is, even if we don't have a refugee resettlement, refugees can come into Wyoming. And we believe, as we hear from anecdotal information, that this is happening. And in fact, we meet people who have been refugees. And so it's another example, like it or don't like it, but you have to recognize that it is happening. And I would rather know what the impact is to our services, what we are doing or not doing. When we hear anecdotal information, a teacher is getting students in a class that say, and we don't know what language they're speaking, what is the state doing to help out, and we just have no handle on that, that's an issue. It's also an issue when you recognize that, you know, the families in the Middle East who have helped our troops and become known, that they, you know, the United States looks for a place safe for them in this country. And so those issues, I think it's important for Wyoming to consider those things. I think it's important for Wyoming to consider that we're the only state that doesn't have any information or any way to even address this issue. And I think it's important when we talk about refugees, and you look at similar sized states, and of course we're the smallest states, that this notion of 1,000 people are going to come in and displace jobs. States of our size, they're talking about 1, 5, 10 people a year. And not this 1,000, or I got asked by a reporter, 10,000 people in a camp. I mean, that is just not accurate. And so people will have agreements and disagreements on this. But again, it's an area, it is happening in terms of we have refugees. And do we want to have a formal way of addressing that? Or do we just want to say, hey, we want to be the only state that doesn't address it? That doesn't seem as responsible to me. The problem we have in the office is, as we look at all the code of federal regulations, you know, I'm not sure it looks extremely bureaucratic to me. And so that's what we're weighing through right now. Is there a better way to do it? Is there a better way to address it without all the code of federal regulations? We understand, for example, like Montana has more of a state-driven system rather than a federal system, and so that's one of the states we're looking at right now. But, you know, to the extent that's a question, one of the questions is we already have this. We don't have it, but as I said, we wrote a letter saying we're going to pursue it, and that's what we're doing now is we're looking at it.
What would be the biggest shift in your administration if you're reelected?
Well, I don't know that there's going to be any big shifts. You know, one of the things that we've been fortunate on is being able to have a pretty steady staff. I've had the same chief of staff, the same deputy chief of staff, the same you know, chief counsel, the same communications director, and so that continuity is great because, you know, they get to know the issues and they help in that way. But in terms of focus, you know, we're going to put a major focus on water strategy. We already got that started, and but I would like to see in the next 4 years for us to have not only an idea, but some very good progress in terms of water projects, water storage, conservation of water. That'll be a major focus. We'll continue on with the economy. As we see us being rated as the second best, most business-friendly state, we want to continue that. As we recognize the last few months as the state with the second fastest growing GDP, we want to continue that. Those are good things. Where we have the, outside of the federal government, state challenges, I certainly think with regard to education, we want to see improvement, and certainly with regard to health. Those are two issues that are tough, and we're trying to find solutions on that, and we need to find solutions. So if we can make improvements on education and on health in the next 4 years, that would be wonderful. With regard to education, our kids are in public school. Their education experience has been tremendous. My wife and I are very happy. I think we have the people, I think we have the teachers, I think we have the administrators to get the job done well in Wyoming. I think where we have been dropping the ball is on the state end, changing rules, changing ideas, and we need to provide some good vision and then some good continuity to help our K through 12 school districts. Also on education, I think one of the things that has served us well and has great potential in the future is our community colleges and the University of Wyoming. I think we need to continue to grow those and make them stronger. Because as I tout low unemployment in the state, some employers aren't smiling as much as I am because they're not able to find some of the workforce that they need. And so there's always a sweet spot there that you're trying for. But I think that with the community colleges, career technical education, UW, we need to continue to build those.
What's the biggest opportunity Wyoming is missing right now? Why do you think that is?
I think one of the areas, I wouldn't say that we're missing, but I think that we have got a ways to go. I mentioned that in 2013 we had the 7th best increase in international exports. I think this is an area that, while that is good news, I think we have a great opportunity to expand that. As I've traveled to Taiwan, South Korea, they are very well aware of what our energy is, and they really want to be trading partners with that. But not limited to that. I think certainly also with regard to ag. And then when I was in Taiwan last year, because I happened to be the most senior U.S. official, I guess a lot of people must have been on vacation, but I got to open up the International Expo, Tourism Expo, and it was amazing to me in doing that, the citizens there, their recognition of Wyoming, mostly tied to Yellowstone National Park, but not exclusive. And with the change in visa laws, I think we have a great potential to expand tourism and to reach those markets in international tourism. And we are doing that, but I think there's a lot of room for growth there.
Well, that's my last question for you, as far as what we have for a list. So give you a chance to make a closing statement, and I guess we'd be interested in the frame of why should we vote for you?
On the closing statement, when I took this office, then and now, I feel like my duty is to represent all the citizens in Wyoming, to make hard decisions. And one of the things I think is important is, we'll make decisions, and we'll make decisions that are tough decisions. Some of them will be right, and some of them will be wrong. We've had decisions that turned out to be wrong, but overall, we think the decisions we've made have been right, and they've all been made in good faith. In other words, thinking this is the best thing for the state. For example, fuel tax. I still get people who are upset about fuel tax. Not an easy decision, nor was it an easy decision when President Reagan did it, but it was the right thing to do in my mind. And I think that's what you have to have, is the ability to make those hard decisions and recognize not all of them are going to be popular. But if you do it by testing the wind, you're not really providing leadership. And so we try to make decisions knowing that some of them are not going to be popular, and we'll continue to do that. But when you look at the state and you see where we started and where we are now, we've addressed a lot of large issues. We've addressed some smaller issues that have not been as recognized. You know, for example, trying to address the homelessness issue in the state. You know, that doesn't get a lot of attention, a lot of press, but it's the same sort of thing. We recognize that our duty is to represent all the people in the state. And so when I say, you know, I would like your vote and I would like your support, I do so saying, you know, look at the record that I have and look at it in terms of, you know, see what decisions I've made, recognize some you may not like, hopefully most you do like, but what is the condition of the state? Where did we start and where did we end up? When you're ranked the first or second best run state in the country for 3 years running, that hopefully is meaningful to our citizens. And then also the way that we do it. You know, I talk about this on occasion. You know, the obligation of governor, the obligation of a city council member, of a county commissioner, of a mayor, is not just to make those tough decisions and to do it you know, with good faith and with the best thoughts in mind and best decision you can make, but also to do it in a way that is civil, that recognizes that there's always going to be debate. And I worry some as we see the political environment nationally and even in Wyoming, that it turns into, if you disagree with somebody, you also have to dislike them. If you disagree with someone, you also have to be uncivil to them. And I worry about that not only for the current environment, I particularly worry about it for the next generation of leaders, our kids and our grandkids. We have to have people who are willing to say, I want to step up, and it's fine to be tested by fire and agreement and disagreement. But if it is, you're going to translate disagreement to hate and anger in that way, I don't think it's good for our republic, our democracy. And so I say we've made good decisions. We've moved the state forward in a positive way, and that the way that we've done it and the way that we would continue to do it is in a civil way, recognizing that that is the best way for the marketplace of ideas to be most robust, is a civil discourse, hard disagreements, but it done in a civil way.
Governor Mead, thank you for coming to the Star-Tribune.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me back. I appreciate it.